I'm grateful, beloved, for joining me on the Healing Streams reflection this time of the year. The title for today's post is Divine Interjection. Divine Interjection. In Luke chapter 24, verse 13 to 32, the Bible says, "Now behold, two of them were traveling that same day to a village called Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they talked together of all these things which had happened. So it was while they conversed and reasoned that Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were restrained, so that they did not know him. And he said to them, What kind of conversation is this that you have with one another as you walked and are sad? Then one of whose name was Cleopas answered and said to him, Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem? And have you not known the things which happened there in these days? And he said to them, What things? So they said to him, The things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet mighty indeed, and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, beside all this, today is the 3rd day since these things happened. Yes, and certain women of our company who arrived at the tomb early astonished us. When they did not find his body, they came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And certain of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. Then he said to them, O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not the Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory? And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Then they drew near to the village where they were going, and he indicated that he would have gone further. But they constrained him, saying, Abide with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is fast spent. And he went in to stay with them. Now it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, that he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. And their eyes were open, and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said to one another, Did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us on the road, and while he opened the scriptures to us? Beloved, this incident in Luke chapter 24, all the way 13, all the way to the end, which is the 53rd verse, is after the resurrection and before the ascension. And it is right along with where we are right now, from Easter to Pentecost, which will be 50 days. And the Bible says Jesus showed himself alive with many infallible proofs for 40 days. Not to people who did not believe, but to his disciples, to calm all the anxieties relating, beloved, to show whether he was legitimately who he said he was, and that he was stronger than death, hell, and the grave. He took the sting out of death, victory out of the grave, and showed himself alive as a testimony in fulfillment to God's prophecy and fully persuading the disciple that he is real. When Jesus rose from the dead, he had stopped showing himself to people who did not believe. So Jesus has consecrated these 40 days to intermediate period where he's only dealing with his disciples so that they will have a firmness of faith, which later will become a cornerstone of the church. This is the intermediate stage. Jesus has risen from the dead and yet has not ascended to his Father, and he's only making house calls. He has stopped doing the miracles that has made people accustomed to him, because he's no more using miracles to convince the unconceivable. Instead, he's showing himself alive to his own. Are you one of his own? One of his Bible students, ready to open scriptures so that your eyes will be open, so that God will show real revelations about who he is. Revelation that people don't see, but you will, just as he did to the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. The Bible says in the 15th verse of Luke chapter 24, while they conversed and reasoned, that Jesus himself drew near and went with them. What an interjection! What a divine intervention! Verse 16 to 18 says, and he said to them, what kind of conversation is this that you have with one another as you walk and are sad? The 15th verse further says, the one whose name was Cleopas answered and said to him, are you the only stranger in Jerusalem, and have you not known the things which happen there in these days? Beloved, unknown to them, they were talking to Jesus. Jesus, who sat on the colt, being showered with praises of Hosanna as the center of Jerusalem, and wept by saying, how often will I have gathered you as a hen does her chicks, but you will not, has now become regarded as a stranger in Jerusalem. Jesus is now in Jerusalem, but now he's a stranger in the holy city. These two disciples of Jesus, traveling that same day to a village called Emmaus, they didn't have the ability to discern Jesus of the conversation. Because sometimes the Jesus you testify about looks different from the Jesus that you walk with. The disciples were despaired and disappointed because they thought Jesus was going to redeem the nation Israel from under the hand of the Roman rule. But Jesus rebuked them in order to bring them into deeper understanding about the messianic reign of Yeshua Mashiach by saying, "O foolish ones, and slow to heart to believe in all that the prophet has spoken." As the 25th verse of Luke chapter 24 tells us. What a divine intervention. And I pray that God will intervene in whatever you are doing on your own and is inadequate, especially intervene in our situation, circumstances, our personality, our behavior, our attitude, our character, and our disposition. Beloved, God has a way of knowing how to intervene in your situation in such a way that you will by all means listen to Him. Friends, without distinction, they were undeniably disciples who have given their life to Jesus Christ. And one of them was called Cleopas, and the other remained anonymous. Their conversation is a reflection of their commitment. They're talking cricket of God. They feel funny, talking about God and in love with God, and you can't shut them up. Friends, we got to love and talk about Jesus to others. But Jesus, being a stranger to them and uninvited into their conversation, put himself, interject himself, as well as intervenes into the conversation. Is God aggressive enough to intervene in your understanding of who He is? Probably yes, because we don't know everything there is to know about God, even though we are His true disciples. Sometimes God will allow you to think you are informing him and will act to you who think you are. And probably you think you are a teacher, allowing you to walk in your own wisdom so that you can discover that your wisdom is foolishness compared to God, until your wisdom has failed and become disappointed and frustrated, just as these two disciples were, as seen in the 21st verse of Luke chapter 24. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Beloved, just because God didn't do what you thought he was going to do doesn't mean God isn't doing something in your life. Now your feelings are hurt because God didn't follow your orders. Remember, God's timing is the best. Therefore, there is the need to be submissive to God, submit to his will, submit to his way and methods. Because God's work done in God's will, God's way, and God's methods will never lack God's support, as someone has said. These two disciples have had the victory, the resurrection, but they felt like a victim when they did not find his body, as the 23rd verse informs us. So the disciples are allowing what they feel to dominate how they believe. What do you do when it seems like your faith doesn't work? For many of us, our faith stops at the cross, and so is your walk or my walk with God, because you are in the pinnacle of pain, the bleeding place where sin is reckoned with, still wrestling with sin in your life, and not the victorious place of the resurrection. Taking your faith beyond the cross is very, very important. Since at this point, the cross is behind us, and Jesus moved from trying to win the masses to revealing himself to the few, to the extent that he has reduced himself to showing himself to the chosen few, as he appears on the road to Emmaus and interrupt the discussion of two disciples talking about, have you heard about the latest news? Probably in town, which I believe is the resurrection. Though the disciple did not see Jesus in the scriptures, despite all 3 years that Jesus had been with them, showing himself through a multiplicity of scriptures, who he really was. However, when he sat down to break bread with him, they saw him and their eyes were open. The Bible says, in the order of the breaking of bread, and as he broke the bread, they suddenly recognized that this is Jesus, and he disappeared out of their sight. The two disciples, Cleopas and his friend, ran back to the other disciples and told them, we have seen the Lord. And while they were trying to rehearse the conversation, the Lord with holes in his hand and torn marks in his body, not bound by where he had been, showed up in their midst. Therefore, verse 36 of Luke chapter 24 says, now as they said these things, Jesus himself stood in the midst of them and said to them, peace to you. Beloved, until you see Jesus as he is, you will never walk in the resurrection power of who Jesus Christ created you to be, because your faith is still stuck at where Jesus was, and you do not see where he is right now. I pray that during this Emmaus Monday, your mind will be open to understand the scriptures better and move from information to revelation, so as to make Christ known best to others, knowing that revelation shines light on information and make it usable and make it useful, so that others will enjoy Jesus Christ. May this bring you into a new realm of reality and understanding for a fruitful Christian life and ministry. Happy Easter Monday, and may God richly bless you.